Welcome to the Pooch Parenting Podcast, a podcast for parents with dogs. I'm Michelle Stern, a certified professional dog trainer, mom, and former teacher. Living with kids and dogs at the same time can feel like a circus. I know because I lived it too. Join us as we interview a variety of experts and parents to discuss topics that will make parenting with dogs easier, safer, and less chaotic. Also, you can love living with your dog again. I'll always keep it real, which might even mean that you hear the messiness of life in the background on occasion, but at least you know you're not alone. Welcome to episode 7. This week we talked to dog trainer Paul Grossart about service dogs and any special considerations we need to keep in mind when adding a service dog to a family who has kids. Hi, Paul. Thank you for coming on to talk with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I have invited Paul from the Mindful Pupper here today because I know that he has a lot of experience training service dogs. And as families with kids and dogs, a lot of people have questions about whether or not they can take their existing pet dog and, quote, turn it into a service dog, or what it would take to get a service dog and add it to their family so that it can support one of their children who has special needs or another member of their household. And so, Paul, would you please introduce yourself? And then I have loads of questions to ask you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Paul Grossart. I own and run the Mindful Pupper, which is based in Tacoma, Washington. For certifications, I just got my CPDT-KA, so I have to remember to tell people that,
Congratulations.
I know I was training in a store the other day, and a random person came up and was all like, "Are you a certified dog trainer?" And I was like, "Well, let's unpack that." And then I was like, "No, I am. Yes."
Actually, I am. I did
Right.
that. I know I got mine last
Oh,
Halloween.
congrats. That's a
While we
big
were
deal.
trick-or-treating, I got my notification. I was visiting, I was actually attending the APDT conference,
Oh,
and
nice.
I was staying with another friend, and I was trick-or-treating with her family, and I got my notification that I got it. So,
Sweet. Right,
congrats.
it's a big deal. Anyway,
It
congrats
is
to
a
you.
big deal because it's an unregulated industry, and so we have demonstrated competency. So,
Yeah, it's
good job
important.
for us. It is
Thanks.
important.
So outside of that, my business focuses on I do a lot of shy, fearful behaviors, as well. That's half of it. That's kind of the nerdy behavior part of it for me. And then the other half of it is I do train service dogs. I do a lot of service dog foundations. I also volunteer as a team facilitator with Atlas Assistance Dogs, which is a really great organization that is boosting positive reinforcement, like just the presence and knowledge and expectations for service dogs in that industry as well, because service dogs are still not very based in positive reinforcement or
I
behavior.
find that very surprising, actually, when I see people out with service dogs in training that are on prong collars. I am
Yeah,
stunned
yeah,
at
yeah. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, right? And I mean, something that we can like probably touch upon more is a lot of guide dog organizations have found that their success rates started raising when they started shifting from aversives to positive reinforcement use, right? So it went from something like 50% success rate to 70% success rate, which is giant, especially when you consider the amount of dogs they're putting through their programs.
Yes.
And so I think that more people in the industry, it would benefit everybody to start kind of pushing for more positive reinforcement and less aversive use. And I think it's just better for the handlers too, right? Less stressful.
It
So
is. Yeah, it is. I agree with you completely. So let's, if you don't mind, I want to dive into the first question that I get asked a lot.
let's
And
put it
families want to know if they can take their existing pet dog and turn it into a service dog. So before we get into that, can you define what a service dog actually is? And
yeah.
then we can talk about what characteristics make a good service dog, which is why a pet dog may or may not be an adequate
Where
choice.
yeah, absolutely. So by the ADA, I will say by the ADA because it's federal relating to in the US. People outside of the US, look up your laws. I know Canada, but I don't know anybody else. Right. So in the ADA, a service dog is a dog that is specifically trained for an individual to mitigate their disabilities.
Okay.
The dog needs to know at least one task. Um, And what that can look like is one task that is generalized to different environments. An example of that might be a diabetic alert, right? Where you teach your dog alert, but that dog needs to learn how to alert when you're asleep or awake or in a theater or at a restaurant, right? And so you're generalizing to these areas. So it becomes
Okay.
more complex. Behavior wise, the dog has to be under control at all times. That's not really defined under the ADA. That's about as good as it gets. A dog can bark once if it is provoked in public. It then has to be back under control. If not, dogs are able, you can ask a dog to leave, right? An organization, an industry, a facility can ask a service dog to be removed if they are not under control or they are disruptive to the business practices,
Okay.
right? Um, and so some great examples of these might be dogs in like laboratories,
Hmm.
dogs only being allowed in certain areas of hospitals, dogs not being allowed in kitchen settings of a restaurant, but
Hmm.
can be allowed in the actual seating area.
Okay.
And the reason that I emphasize that is because I think a lot of people think service dog, I want my dog to go everywhere with me. Let's do this.
Yes.
Right? And yeah, like who doesn't want that? Some people don't want that. I have a reactive dog. I don't need him coming everywhere with me, right? But I also have a service dog. That's what he's there for. Um, but it's really like I think it's really important to know that people are clear that service dogs can be asked to be removed, right? And that as much as that sucks, that is kind of part of the fallout that we're seeing with a lot of like fake service dogs and stuff that are out and about.
Yes.
Anyway, I know that's about to be a
No, you
tangent.
know what? I think we need to touch on that. Okay, let's just
Yeah.
touch on fake service dogs. And I mean, we could do an entire episode on fake service
Well,
dogs.
let's
But yeah, go ahead.
okay. Let's go back to so what part of your initial question was what it takes to kind of be a service dog,
Oh,
right?
good. Yes.
Because then we can go from there to what it takes to
Okay.
not be a good service dog, and then
Good. That's
kind of
perfect.
right.
Magic. Okay, excellent. Good.
So knowing all that by the ADA and different states and different counties can vary. I guess we should also say so ESAs, emotional support animals, are
Yes.
not service dogs. Therapy dogs are
Yep.
not service dogs. These are different categories.
Can you
Um,
describe what each of those is real quick?
yeah, so an ESA is an animal that has not specifically been trained as a task, but provides emotional support or comfort.
Okay.
Um, so it's clear to distinguish that even though I'm like, I want to hold space for this stuff, right? Like, holding space for it is important to me. I know that this can be hard, especially if you're sitting here and you're like, tell me the things, tell me that my dog comforts me, and it is a task and it makes me feel better because it does, right? It makes you feel better, and that's great. The thing that distinguished tasks, trainable tasks, from emotional comfort is that the trainable part of it, right? So just a dog being present isn't a task. A task is something that you have to condition and train and generalize to these different areas, right? A dog being present, seeing that you're freaking out, and then pressing up against you or nosing your hands to stop some ticking, right? Um, or curling up at your feet, right? Those are tasks, right? You have then taken something your dog's already doing, turned it into something that looks a little bit more specific for your needs, and then you have a task, right? So all ESAs do, their presence is comforting. Um, ESAs, for the most part, only qualify under the Fair Housing Act, as well as, and this, you're going to catch me on this one.
I
It
know.
just changed. The airport just
Yeah,
changed.
it did.
Um, so they were under the ACAA, right? But they are not. It depends on clarifying that it depends on the flight that you.
Again, this goes back to the fake situation. Too many
Yeah.
people have taken advantage of rules because they don't want to pay extra fees to put their dog in below the airplane, or they're too worried about the
And
safety of the dog.
you get that emotional comfort part of it.
Definitely, but of course, we can talk about this more, but a poorly prepared dog for that environment can put a true service dog or their handler at risk, right? Because that dog, while it may make you feel better that you can reach down and pet your dog on the plane, your dog may not know how to behave appropriately around a service dog that literally is keeping someone alive, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing is that if your dog is reactive in a public setting, they're not happy in a public setting, right? Like, let's be real about that, you know? If your dog is happy on your lap, but the moment you put them on the floor, they're lunging and barking at everybody, your dog's not happy, right?
Mhm.
And that is what, like, that is why I am doing service dog training. That is why I'm here. And in this, because I want to see happy and functional and confident service dogs,
Yeah,
right? And fake service dogs are that is kind of one of the hardest things and the hardest things to train and gauge for. I live in an area where we have so many fake service dogs. The county right next to mine, in this county, I'm hesitant to say this because nobody's going to be happy about this. In this county, ESAs do have public access,
uh,
right? And
uh,
so there's a lot more permission for people to be taking any animal that they want to. There are some limitations, but it's very broad. Into stores when these animals aren't prepared for it, right? Part of service dog training, and the hardest part of service dog training isn't the tasks. It is about teaching a dog to be comfortable and confident in the million possible things that can happen in places that dogs aren't supposed to be,
right.
right? And you're talking about very basics of, can your dog ignore a hamburger that somebody dropped on the floor, right?
Mhm.
Can your dog now ignore a hamburger that a stranger has intentionally tossed towards your dog,
Oh
right? Can
God.
your dog, like, the things happen, carts, like, people aren't expecting dogs in these places. So I always get people that are looking for to build or rebuild confidence around carts, shopping carts, around loud noises, sudden things that might happen that they just didn't expect. Um, I mean, really, it's like all of the things.
So, so this is important. And what you just said, sudden things that you don't expect. This happens a lot for my people who have children
Absolutely.
because children are the definition of sudden things you don't expect, right? They're loud, they are unpredictable, they fall down a lot, they scream a lot, they have really obnoxious toys that make noises and flashy lights, and they carry balloons that pop unexpectedly, right? So all of those things can cause a huge amount of stress to a dog. So
Yeah.
let's say a family has a pet dog, um, and they say, "Well, my child has this special need." I one person asked me about a dog training a dog to go after their child who would try to run away when they had a tantrum, right? And this was a processing challenge that this child had. It was an autistic child, and they wanted to see if they could get the dog to go after the child and bring it back home. However, they had also mentioned that the dog wasn't reliable off leash, which I could see being a big problem because if you open the front door for the dog to go get the child and the dog maybe sees a squirrel, that may be a higher value item to the dog than the child. So, how do you help a family navigate these really hard decisions of, first of all, if they actually would benefit from a service dog, and if so, what the true legitimate, like, treat your dog with respect process would be to determine, is my dog capable of it, is my dog too old to do the training of it because it takes a long time, and if not, what should I do instead?
Yeah, so I'll say this is the biggest question that I get from parents is parents of autistic kids that tend to wander or meander or just easily get lost track of, and they want a dog to either bring the kid back or fetch the kid or tell them that the kid's lost or block the kid from the door. And just to go back in my history, so I'm neurodivergent. I have a long history of working within the autistic community. I am super familiar with all the variations of what that looks like, right? And I want to hold space for how hard that can be as a parent, right?
Yes.
To figure out how to navigate this environment and mitigate your child's disabilities and make sure they get raised with the right skill set that they need for their developmental phase, right? Because that stuff's all changing. Like, it's rough, right? And
Yeah.
so adding a service dog into that is just one more factor, and not just the training of it is one more factor, but it's also like that's one more possibility of something that could work, right? And who doesn't want more tools? And so I think that when children are involved, we have to think about one, is the service dog for us or for our kid? Right?
Hmm.
Is there a benefit? I mean, one, is your kid old enough to understand how to interact with the dog appropriately, right? But two, is your child going to get more of the benefit, or is it really just for you, right? Because then we're going to start walking that line that the dog's not necessarily mitigating your kid's disability; it's just kind of making things easier for you, right?
Ah, yes.
Um,
That's a really nice distinction, actually.
yeah, and not saying that like I think parents should I do not have children. There is a reason for that, right? I think parents have it rough and you need more tools for all of the things, right?
I agree, but we
Um,
have to, I mean, if we're going to have a service animal, we need to be extra super clear on who it's for and what its task is.
yes, and that your kid, if it is for your kid gets to decide as they learn and grow if a task is helpful or not, right? So that's the other thing. So we'll talk about not knowing um, everybody's animals and their pet dogs, right? And I'm sure they're all amazing in the ways that they're amazing and they're
Yes.
wonderful. And in the right settings with the right training, half of them could totally do it, right? But
Yes.
setting up the environment for success when you already have a dog is very hard, right? So going back to what I was saying, so we'll go back to guide dog schools, right? Their
Mhm.
tasks are different than what we're asking more or less. Um, but guide dog schools breed dogs specifically, like genetically for this purpose. We're talking about temperament tests, we're talking about physical attributes. I can go on because I also work with breeders, right? But you're
Yep.
talking about at least a litter of dogs specifically made to carry the lineage of guide dogs. And still, after that, after the puppy raising, after the 6 months of intense guide dog school, they're only 70% success rate, right? So some people with service dogs totally get lucky. They fall upon the most amazing dog. They can do the work that the person needs them to do, and that's great.
Mhm.
But statistically, the chances are very low, right?
Yeah, I raised a service puppy for
Yeah.
an organization near me called Bergen University or Bergen College of Canine Studies or something like that, but Bergen, and it was a really great experience. I learned a lot, but the dog that I raised did not make it, and she was. I was hoping that she could maybe go on to do some kind of important job, maybe search and rescue. She was the kind of dog that really had to be busy to be happy,
Yeah.
and I knew that because of that personality trait where she could never sit still, I knew that had she been assigned to somebody who was in a wheelchair or whatever, that she wouldn't be able to just sit in between the active times. She maybe would be, I was dreaming in my fantasy world that she would be a diabetic alert dog for an avid hiker, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be great for her, where she was like hiking all the time and then occasionally had to do a job. But
Right.
it didn't work out. And she was hard. I'm a
Yeah.
dog trainer, and she was a hard dog to raise. And it really made me realize, wow, if these people are intentionally breeding these specific dogs because of these specific traits and it still doesn't work out, um, then the odds are very, very small that a regular pet dog that wasn't chosen for anything in particular other than to be a pet would be successful in being put into a career that it wasn't designed to do.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? And so let's like as I assess a client for service dog potential, right? That's kind of where I start. Where did the dog start? What was its intent, right? What's its background, right? From there, you have to add, depending on the tasks that you need, you have to add the complexity of making sure the dog is the proper size and healthy. So mobility tasks, even for children, um, sad part is there's no official like here are the size requirements,
Right.
right? A lot of, and I do the same, a lot of people just go off of the general rule of thumb that's been thrown around the service dog community because not a lot of people are studying these things. Um,
Mhm.
And so, general rule of thumb, a dog should be at least 22 inches high, right? At least, for mobility, right? So already you have to now measure your
So
dog's
can
shoulders.
I just clarify real quick? So
Yeah.
when you say for mobility, do you mean to help you walk steadily? Maybe you're unsteady on your feet, or you need help being pulled up once you've fallen down, or things like that? Do you mean for balance and stuff like that?
Yeah, all of those things. So
Okay.
I would even consider like light guide walk or forward momentum pull, which is when your dog creates intentional tension to
Oh,
help push a forward. So
okay.
you can then subdivide mobility into light mobility and heavy mobility, and the weight percentages are a little bit different.
Okay.
That's getting into some nitty gritty, right?
Okay.
But let's just keep in mind
So
if there are
22 inches, you said, at the shoulder?
yeah, at the shoulder.
Okay.
Um, but, so I think a lot of people think, "Oh, I have a kid though, so the dog can be smaller," right? But a
Mm,
lot of smaller dogs are not actually made in proportion to be carrying the type of weight that a child is going to put on them,
that makes
even
sense.
if the child is trained correctly to apply pressure to the right spots, right?
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, so you've got kind of genetic background of the dog, let's go with that, and then you kind of have to think about what tasks is the dog even right for those tasks?
Right.
Um, and then we can maybe let's dive into the temperament a little bit of the specific dog, right? And so, like you were saying, service dogs, and sometimes people get upset about this, but service dogs need to be able to be bored. Being a human is boring. They might love the crap out of it, and you want a service dog that loves to be bored, but being a human is boring. Half
Mhm.
of our life is just kind of waiting in line for stuff, right? Waiting in line for stuff and ignoring everybody around us. That's their job.
Oh
I know,
gosh.
it's so hard. My
Oh.
my service dog, he's wonderful. I love him. He is so versatile and he is busy, right? And he gets bored when he's just hanging out waiting for me to decide if I'm a blue cheese or sharp cheddar cheese, and that is like the capacity we have, right? Um,
Mhm.
but right, so it's taken a lot of work to build that in, but he is busy. So like you were saying, right, if you have a busier dog, sometimes if you have the time and energy to commit to an outside hobby so that they can balance that service work, that's wonderful. Some dogs make that happen.
Mhm.
Um, but then you're just taking on twice as much training because you need to satisfy your dog, and then you get to train them for service dog work,
Oh
right?
my gosh. Yeah, no, I think what you just said is really important. That's kind of why I was hoping that Yara would find some kind of service work that required her to be busy, because then it would be one and the same. But I was overwhelmed by the demands, and even just trying to sit at my computer and get anything done. She would sit and stare at me, and then I mean, there were a variety of behaviors that I didn't allow, demand barking and pawing and things like that. So we had to come up with alternate ways where she could express how she was feeling that were more appropriate. However, it meant that for a really long time, I couldn't get anything else done.
Yeah,
And so I know that if you were a parent with a child and you had a dog like that, then something's got to give. I mean, this recording this podcast is for people to know that it is really hard to parent kids and dogs at the same time in the best of circumstances.
yeah,
And if we add in a dog that has its own, I don't know, I mean, special needs really, or that is more demanding than somebody else, then you're taking on a whole nother level of responsibility that you may not have the capacity to handle. And there is no shame in that. I need
absolutely.
to be clear on that, right? You have to get through the day. You have to keep yourself alive. You have to keep your kids alive. You have to not go absolutely insane. And if you do, you need to get help for that.
Yeah,
And you need to keep the dog from causing damage to itself, to the house, to your kids, to whatever. I mean, it is a lot of balls to keep in the air. And then if you want to add to that, I want to take my existing dog because I can't afford, this is another common thing. I can't afford to buy either a service dog puppy or buy a dog that has been trained already to become a service dog, because that can be upwards of 50 or $60,000, right? There are some organizations that maybe are funded and whatever, but this is, I don't want to sound horrible. So I just need to say this first because I am a dog person, as are you. But this service dog is a tool, like a wheelchair. It is a piece of equipment with a heart and with warm fur, and we love it, obviously. But a service dog is a I don't know, something that helps you get stuff done, right? How do we say this without sounding rude and horrible?
I mean, I in a sense, you can't, right? It's a piece of medical equipment, right?
Thank
So
you.
a
That's what
service
I was
dog is a
looking
piece of
for.
medical equipment,
Yes.
um, and just like any other, right? And so, yeah, like you said, right, it might come across as harsh, but if you think about what kind of maintenance does an electric wheelchair need, right? Um, Especially with a child, right? Even let's just say crutches for a child. What kind of maintenance, right? Well, first, you need something that is sturdy enough for everything your child's gonna do and do to them, right? That's awesome. And then it needs to be able to grow with your kid, right? They need to be able to be handled in different environments, right? You need to make sure that the bottoms never get slick, right? They can handle the terrain that you're gonna be walking on or your kid's gonna be going on, right? So already we have these things. Same thing applies to a service dog, right? You don't just get a service dog, it's a service dog. The training is over, right? These are dogs, just like other equipment, they get wear and tear. Things happen unpredictably in the environment. Your kid grows, and not just child, right? Like people with disabilities or disabilities change. Doesn't matter in what direction or where, right? But over time, our disabilities and the tools that we need to mitigate those, they change,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yes.
so you're investing in a dog that's able to change with that need,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Um, and so it's not just so the general rule is that it'll take up to 2 years to train a service dog from scratch,
Okay.
right? That's also when you're talking with a puppy, so you're working your way through a lot of adolescence going on within that 2 year period too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that's a general, right? Don't set the bar too low type of thing. 2 years,
Yeah.
that's kind of what you're looking at.
Right.
And this is consistent training, right? This is please always work with a trainer, right? Like owner
Yeah.
training is a thing. It's legit in the US. You can owner train your own dog. I think that one of the reasons that's so popular is because pre-trained dogs are so expensive,
Oh,
right? And there's a lot that goes into it. That's why they're expensive. But
yes.
please always work with a trainer. Like
Yes.
always, always, always. I don't care if it's once a month, right? Because having a second set of eyes is going to be so important. I think the other thing that people don't take account of, and this kind of goes back to the temperament of the dog, is that a lot of times our dogs will take on our emotions, right?
Yes.
So when you're talking about somebody, I have big feelings. I am somebody that has big feelings, right?
Yes.
I think you just got to own it if you're someone like that, right? That doesn't mean that it looks like one way or another. It's just that when I have feelings, they are big and they are present. Um, and so picking a dog that isn't going to take that on, but can
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge that that exists
Right.
and perform the appropriate tasks, right?
Okay. Yes.
Um, and anybody that's worked with adolescent dogs, like they're emotional sponges, right? So even with me and my big feelings, I was working with my adolescent puppy who's going to be a service dog. He knew before I did that I was done, right? I think one of our biggest hiccups is like a stranger would approach and he's a Merle, so he's very stunning. So people be like, oh, what a cute dog. And just like he learned so fast that when somebody said that, it was just a no-go, like, I was out, right? And so he just and, like, he is wonderful, he's vocal, he's a vocal breed, so he'd bark once, and I'd be like, "Buddy," and I'm like, "I'm sorry, we gotta go," and then we'd walk away, but it started
Yeah.
happening, and I was like, "Oh, you're, like you're picking up on this, right? That
Yes.
is actually not what you want from a service dog,"
Right.
right?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I like you mentioned earlier, you work in addition to service dogs, but just with a lot of shy and fearful dogs in general. And when I encounter families who have shy and fearful dogs, kids and their big feelings can be a huge trigger to those dogs because those dogs may be in conflict. This is a common situation where the dog wants to be close to the parent which then puts the dog in proximity to the child with the big feelings. So they're stuck and they don't leave, which is really confusing because the parent thinks, well, if the dog is uncomfortable, the dog should leave. But the dog is choosing to be with the adult, seeking comfort that is not coming because the parent may or may not know how to comfort that dog, right? So teaching a dog to move away, or in your case, teaching a dog to pick up on your cue that dad is getting stressed. I need you to lead me out of here, because I know, for example, in a lot of dogs with PTSD, they will start to notice your cues and they will say, I'm taking you to the nearest exit. And that is a trained task that helps that person in particular, right? We got to get out of here before, he blows his lid,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is amazing. But you can't take a dog that already has a ton of its own feelings and then ask that dog to then be solid enough to take care of other people's needs at the same time as its own. It doesn't seem like a fair ask.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, right? Like we talked about how service dogs are medical equipment, but they're medical equipment with emotional needs,
Oof,
right? And that is like I don't need my walker to have feelings, right?
yeah, but
But
that's what it
but
is.
that's exactly what it is. So when you are starting with pets that people already have, you do have to take into account what their emotional needs are, um, and how like you also have to meet those for them to be happy doing the tasks that they need to do,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Um, do you maybe you can provide some links for us that I can include in the show notes when we publish this, so that we can give families some resources to draw from on either how to maybe find a good service dog trainer, or service dog organizations that provide service dogs for families, or ready to go dogs. I mean, I'm not really sure even what all of the options actually are. Maybe you could talk about that for a second and then we could provide some resources for people.
yeah, absolutely. I'll put some together. I'm gonna be honest, where there aren't actually a lot, there are a few organizations I can think of off the top of my head that do work specifically with children.
Okay.
Um, but in general, you're gonna a lot of organizations have like 10 years of age being the cutoff because they've kind of as a whole decided that's when a small human can actually understand how to help handle a dog,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
um as well as understand what they're there for and that they're useful, and choose to be involved or not involved, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yes.
sometimes people will set up like parents will go out of their way to set up their dog with a service dog, and I've seen actually quite a few people that they age out of it, right? Where they're like, I have a service dog, this is great. And then they kind of start being a little resentful of the dog. And then 2 years later, um, your kid's working on different coping skills, right? And they just don't have a need for the dog anymore.
Right.
Um, that
That's
that is
interesting.
that's totally normal, and I see that in adults too, right? A lot of adults seeking psychiatric support dogs, which
Hmm.
is super legit. And they'll go through the process of training their dog, right? And then maybe a year or two later, they're actually getting out more than they have been, and they're utilizing different coping skills, or they had to make medication shift, or depending on their age, right? They kind of grew out of what they were struggling with.
Hmm. Right.
Um, and they just didn't need the dog anymore. And I think that it's important that, like, if you're going to invest, it's a long-term investment, but there's always the potential that for a child, they might grow out of it, right? Not growing out of their disability, growing
No,
out of their need for a
I know
service.
exactly what you meant. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. No, I do see that, in my life as a mother and in my experience as a teacher, I saw people changing all the time and also dogs changing all the time, right? And when you have dogs and children changing in parallel or the opposite of parallel, that's also another challenge that, sometimes creatures are incompatible with one another, even with the best of intentions.
Yeah, and I think like something to note too is that I've been saying a lot of like no's, and your current pet's probably not going to be the best service dog. But if your kid has an attachment to your current dog, find a local trainer and together learn how to teach this dog some fun tricks. There's nothing saying that you can't teach a pet dog or item retrieval, right?
Right.
Or a blocking or an alert, right?
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
because a dog might know a task doesn't mean that it needs to be in public, right? Um,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
No, that's a good clarification because your dog can still be helpful without being a service dog.
yeah, and sometimes just the relationship building part of that is the most helpful thing,
Yeah.
right? You and your
Yeah.
kid doing this really cool thing together and improving your relationship with your family pets, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's awesome too, you
Well,
know?
that's huge. I mean, that's one of my whole goals of my professional career is to help families love living with their dog again. Period.
Yeah,
That's it. That's what this is for. That's what my membership is for. It's what all my work is for, is that I don't want dogs to be landing in shelters because the dog isn't set up to succeed, and I want to help you set the dog up to succeed, but I also want you to feel empowered to do fun stuff with your
yeah,
dog and be able to cope. And that's hard sometimes when you literally feel like the dog might eat your baby. I mean,
yeah,
like literally people feel like that. And
yeah.
it's hard and sad to be wallowing in this feels like despair because you don't even know that help like what you and I offer even exists. And it does.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's really important, right? Like small goals, even for like starting off a service dog, right? Like small goals. I tell everybody that comes with me with a puppy is I'm like, we want a confident puppy. That's the first thing we want. Do we
Yep.
see a confident puppy? How do we get there? And then we can kind of start talking about more service dog specific training. But if you have a dog right now and you're like, are they a good service dog? Are they confident and happy and comfortable? Right? If not,
Mhm.
start there, right?
Yep.
Start working on some of that fear related responses, right? Um, and then go from there, right?
And I guess I would add one little caution based on my experience trying to raise a service dog is to relax your expectations of the
Yeah,
outcome
yeah,
because I can't just assume because I'm raising her as a service dog in training that she will be a service dog, right? That's the goal. It was the goal, and I did my darndest to make that happen, and it didn't. And I was not surprised, but I
yeah,
was a little bummed because I wanted to be the one who could like help this hard dog be what I wanted her to be. But I also didn't punish myself or feel like a failure because I knew that I did the best with what I had. And I want families to know that if they call you or if they call another trainer and say, I have, I got a puppy because I think it will be a good service dog one day, or I have a service dog, quote, prospect. That's a word a lot of people use. That you remember that it's a prospect. It's a dog and it has feelings and it is vulnerable to experiences in the world, which may influence its future behavior. And it may or may not be a service dog at the end of the day. But we have to help it have its best life first.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that is such an important thing to note is that like service dogs aren't cookie cutters, right? And maybe you saw a service dog out in public or on a video and they were tasking and you're like, I want exactly that, right? One, that is one clip of a service dog and their training and their lifespan, right? You're getting one probably really good, well curated clip. I do it for my business. Not saying my dogs are disasters, but I'm definitely like, this was the best part of the loose leash walk. We're sharing this one,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Um, but they're not machines, right? So they're
Yeah.
not cookie cutters. All service dogs have their good days and bad days. All service dogs are going to excel at certain tasks versus other tasks. They're going to be more distracted by some things versus other things. There's no like perfect service dog, and so you do have to constantly change your expectations for where your dog is at, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, in the end of the day, you just want a confident, happy dog, right? And so I think going back to when you're looking for a service dog organization or a trainer because you have a puppy or you have a dog that you're listening to this and you're all like, yes, my dog is confident in different places and I've put work in that and I'm proud of that. I'm going to go find a service dog trainer. Ask them a lot of questions and vet them well. well, right? And not just from the positive reinforcement versus aversive use side of it, but ask for examples of the service dogs that they're putting out. Ask if you can talk to other clients,
Mm,
right?
good idea.
Google the heck out of them, right? And see what videos they're putting out. Watch the body language and how they're explaining what's happening, right? I got sucked into a lot of very poor trainers, right? Early on when I was learning about service dog training, and it's very easy to do because you want the benefits of it, you want a working dog, and you want them now. And a lot of people will tell you that you can get that. Um, and so I think that we can get caught up in the rush of how good that's going to feel when your dog is there. But take the time to vet them and to talk to people that they're working with and to talk to them extensively about what they think that a good service dog looks like and what they want the outcome to be and how they respond to certain things, right? Or what they like best about it. But you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you to be a client and to work together,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think people need to make sure that they find professionals who offer them the whole package of what they need, not just the shiny object, you know,
Yeah.
waving around some goal. And also, I would also caution against anyone who gives you a guarantee
Yes.
and anyone who gives you a specific timeline, because again, as we said before, these are living, breathing creatures, and they they have a role to play in this, and nobody can make them do something on a schedule that doesn't actually work for them.
Absolutely. And things always I got it like so I've been training service dogs for over 6 years. I'll say this. Life always happens to all of my clients. I don't care what package they invest in or how much, right, they're working off. Life happens and things will be put on hold for at least 2 to 3 months at some point during this dog's training, right? And you're going to have to jump back to it. So the guarantees part is really big, right? And knowing that a trainer can be flexible to that happening, right?
Mhm.
Because all of my clients, right? Something
Yeah,
happens, they're gone for 2 to 3 months, and then we're back at it, right?
right. Yes.
So
Yes, definitely. Well, this has been so helpful, and I hope that it's been informative for our audience who has wondered about having a service dog and whether or not it would be appropriate for them, and if they can take their existing dog and convert it, train it into being something that it may or may not have been designed to do. So I think we have to be really honest about what we're working with. Dogs are not clay. We can't just mold them into whatever we want. So that's an important thing to remember.
absolutely, yeah. No, I super appreciate you having me on. This has been really
I know. So can you just tell us where we can find you online if we want to look you up? And of course, I will include all of those in the show notes, but let us know where we can find you.
yeah, you can find me at mindfulpupper.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and apparently Twitter under at mindfulpupper as well. I did not realize I created a Twitter like a year ago.
Okay, so that's maybe not the best place to find you if you didn't know you had
Well,
an
you
account.
can find me there now because I know that I have one. So
Oh, that's good. Do you prefer are you an Instagram guy or a Facebook guy or both?
I'm on both. Yeah, and you
Okay.
can message me. Messaging me is the best. It's gonna be hard. I made it intentionally hard to find my phone number because I hate taking phone calls.
Yeah, I
Um,
understand.
yeah, but messages
Okay,
and emails are the best way.
great. Well, thank you for being a resource. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to sharing other resources with our people on
Absolutely.
how they can find out more about service dogs. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Pooch Parenting Podcast on iTunes or on the podcast app of your choice. If you're looking for ongoing support for your family with dogs, be sure to get on the waiting list for my Thriving Parents with Kids and Dogs membership at www.safekidsanddogs.com. And don't forget to follow Pooch Parenting on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks for listening.